quite a few years ago, I had gone to see a movie. It was the third Lord of the Rings movie, Return of the King. And the year was 2003, I believe. And at that time, as you might recall, if you went to a movie, especially a popular movie, you had to go well in advance to get a ticket and to get a good seat in the movie theater. So we had done that. We'd gotten our tickets, we'd gone into the movie theater, we'd gotten good seats, but now we had like almost an hour before the movie was to begin. So we were sitting there, myself, my girlfriend at the time, and some of our friends. We were sitting there just chatting away, passing the time, as people do. And other people were buying tickets and coming into the movie theater. And this fellow, he had bought a ticket, him and his friends, and he came over and sat on my right. And this fellow began loudly telling his friends that he had joined Kung Fu, and he was learning some very magical kind of stuff. He was talking about chi and pressure points, and pretty sure he was talking about how one of his instructors could levitate and was impervious to groin kicks. All this fairly crazy stuff. Now, bear in mind, there's lots of styles of Kung Fu, right? There's some that are more sportive. There's one called San Shao that is like kickboxing with takedowns. There's one called Shui Shuao or something. It's like wrestling or judo, basically. It's wrestling with jackets on, it's a sport. There's one that's called Chin Na, which is basically like standing joint locks. That one's not a sport, but it's like traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu, and it's, pretty mean. And then there's these other ones that are not sportive. They're more, theoretical. There's drunken monkey kung fu, where people act like drunken monkeys. There's white crane kung fu, where I guess people act like cranes. There's all kinds, and there's, I did kung fu when I was a kid, and I found it very strange because the kind of kung fu I did, I think they called it Shaolin Kung Fu, and they taught us a variety of strange techniques, but then the sparring was basically Muay Thai. In the sparring, we did none of the techniques they had shown us earlier in the class. Whatever. My point is, this guy over to my right, he was going on and on and on about the Kung Fu he was learning, which was very supernatural, if you will, pressure points and chi and levitating, and how his instructor is impervious to groin kicks, the whole thing, right? And I look over at my girlfriend at the time, and she's looking at me going, don't say anything. Because, we have, over half an hour now before the movie starts, and she doesn't want us to get kicked out of the movie theater because I've gotten into some kind of, fight with a Kung Fu guy, you know what I mean? And for a while, I try and just let it slide, because I try to be easygoing, right? Swish. And I'm expecting the conversation to change topics. I'm expecting this guy to start telling his friends about his favorite cheese, or a girl he's dating, or something. But it doesn't. He just keeps going on and on and on and on and on about Kung Fu and all the magical things that, he's learning to do, And bear in mind, this is 2003, so this is like the pinnacle, the apex of mixed martial arts. It's not the early days, it's not before the UFC, it's not even the early days of the UFC. This is like, the UFC is in full swing, Pride is in full swing, there's magazines about all kinds of stuff, and, this is no time to be, uninformed, let's say, right? But again, I'm holding my tongue thinking, this will come to an end and we'll all get to enjoy the movie. And soon enough, the movie theater starts to fill up, and a fellow comes in that works for the movie theater, and he's asking people to move. Oh, would you move over here? Would you move over there? Because he wants there to be seats together, you know what I mean? Rather than empty seat here, empty seat there, could you move over so there's two seats together? And he comes up the stairs, and he's asking people to move over, and he asks this Kung Fu guy, oh, would you and your friends mind moving over one so there's two seats together here at the end? And somehow, the Kung Fu guy turns this into a conversation about Kung Fu. And he starts telling the movie theater guy, he starts going on and on and on about the Kung Fu he's learning and how he's learning to manipulate chi and poison people's energy and stuff. And you can see the movie theater guy is like trying to find a polite way to excuse himself from this conversation because he's got a job to do. He's got to ask people to move so there's, seats together. He can't just chat with this guy about poisoning chi or whatever. And so at this point I say, you know what, I've had enough. You know what I mean? And I interrupt and I say, hey, I do martial arts as well. And the movie theater guy looks over and goes, oh, do you also do Kung Fu? And I said, no, I do jiu-jitsu, because at the time I was training at a local, it was really more of a mixed martial arts club because it was more, jiu-jitsu for MMA, but I said, I do jiu-jitsu. He goes, oh, do you, what's that? Is that like Kung Fu? I said, oh, no, jiu-jitsu, we choke Kung Fu guys. And then it's like a gong in the distance sounds, you know what I mean? And like the Kung Fu guy, having said this, he like turns and gives me the here we go look, you know what I mean? And then the movie theater employee, he says to me, I like you, you're a funny guy. And he continues on his way up the stairs asking people to move over so there's seats together, right? And so now, like I said, the Kung Fu guy, he's turned to me. And he says, oh, you think you can beat me in a real fight? And and now we're in the thick of things. We're not in a real physical fight. We're having a conversation now. And I say to him, hey, I used to do Kung Fu, right? So I know what Kung Fu's about. I did the whole poisoning, monkey steals the magic peach kind of stuff. And from there I did Taekwondo, then I moved to Hapkido, then Judo, and now I do Jiu-Jitsu. And we get guys that come into the club and they think they know how to whatever, and we tackle them and we choke them, So, And I said to him, have you even seen, like, UFC 1? Did you see what, like, Hoist Gracie did to Jason DeLucia, who at the time, I think, was a Kung Fu guy? And the guy hadn't seen any of it, And I said, well, why don't you come down to the club? And I wasn't trying to be hostile with the guy. I was just trying to, like, educate him, maybe, I guess. I don't know. When I invited him down, I said, hey, come down to the club. And, he goes, oh, we can have, like, a fight with, like, biting and eye gouging and groin kicks and the whole thing. And I said, do you want to have that kind of fight? Because, we're both allowed to eye gouge and groin kick and bite if you want to do that. And on that topic, I said, have you ever really gouged someone's eye? Have you gouged anyone's eye? He's like, well, no, we don't, actually gouge each other's eyes. I said, well, because the thing is, where I train, we really do test what we learn. We do the takedowns, we practice chokes and arm locks. We even, Tuesdays and Thursdays is more of like an MMA kickboxing thing with takedowns and choking each other and stuff, So why don't you come down and just try that? He's, oh, well, I'm not, I'm not an expert. I've just started. I said, well, no, I'm not asking, I'm not challenging you to a challenge match. I'm just saying, come try what it is we do, widen your horizons, And he says, well, I've signed an agreement that I will not use my Kung Fu and blah, 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 blah. So he's just looking for reasons now to not, which seems strange to me. You know what I mean? Because, I don't know, in martial arts, it's weird to not want to learn more, Bruce Lee was a Kung Fu guy, and his whole thing was learning more. He learned, I think he started with Wing Chun, and from there he learned this and learned that. I think for a while he was training with Jean LaBelle and learning, grappling and stuff. In his book, in Jeet Kune Do, there's diagrams of grappling and stuff, And I said to the guy, have you not seen the UFC Pride? Have you seen Kazushi Sakuraba, Fedor Emelianenko, Wanderlei Silva? He hadn't seen any of it, which is shocking considering it was 2003. It wasn't the early 60s. This was, like I said, this was the apex. This was the pinnacle of of mixed martial arts. It was all over the place. There was magazines and pay-per-views and books and all kinds of stuff, but he hadn't seen any of it. So he was living in, a kind of fantasy world, and I wanted to invite him out of that, but he wasn't interested. He wasn't interested. And that's why I call this story The Kung Fool, But it's not specifically about Kung Fu. It's about like a swimming analogy. There's people that, everyone that thinks they can swim has actually swum. You know what I mean? But imagine there's a whole bunch of people that talks about a kind of swimming, but they've never really gotten in the water. Wouldn't you want to say to them, hey, maybe get in the shallow end and see if that, see if that works? Because it'd be a real shame if you thought you could swim and all of a sudden you slip and you fall in a lake and you can't swim at all. You know what I mean? And that was my gist for the Kung Fu guy. I was like, if you think you can fight, don't you want to at least test it out? Because it'd be a real shame if you thought you could defend yourself and you get into the thick of things and it doesn't work at all, And like I said, that's not true about all Kung Fu people. There's some that can really fight. You know what I mean? Like I said, there was Kung Lee in Strikeforce, and I think Jason DeLucia, after UFC 1, he went on to fight at Pancrase and did pretty well and stuff. But it just struck me as very odd that in 2003 there was a guy that was, ignoring reality. Anyway, I invited the guy to come by the club I was training at, but he never showed up, which I guess isn't much of a surprise. He just wanted to live in his, world of ignorance. Is that what it is? I don't know. Some people would rather be, living in a world of fantasy where they have magical powers than living in a world of reality where they don't, Anyway, then at that point, the curtains went up, if there were curtains, or maybe they split, and we watched the third Lord of the Rings movie, Then we all went our separate ways, and the guy never came by. Yep. And telling that story, it makes me feel a little bit like a jerk. But I just wanted the guy to I just wanted the guy to know how to fight. And the funny thing is, like I said, it's not specific to Kung Fu, right? You could even say there's some jiu-jitsu guys who fall into that category now, Like guys that are, that don't spar, And that's the thing, is there's martial arts that have sparring, and there's martial arts that don't. And the ones that have sparring, jiu-jitsu, judo, boxing, wrestling, Muay Thai, you're testing it. You're like, to use the swimming analogy, you're getting in the water and seeing if you can swim, And then there's other ones where there's no sparring whatsoever, Like Aikido and Tai Chi and certain styles of Kung Fu. And bear in mind, if you're doing a sport, or if you're doing a martial art that you like, if you're doing Aikido and you like it, great. If you're doing Kung Fu and you like it, fantastic. If you're doing Jiu-Jitsu and you like it, great. But the danger falls into when you start thinking you have skills in this when you're practicing that. You're not going to have skills in this if you're practicing that. You know what I mean? Nobody says this is that or that is this. It doesn't work that way. You need experience, And if you want to say you can defend yourself, you have to be doing it in a way that is, you have to be simulating it in a somewhat realistic kind of way, And you don't have to be like the Dog Brothers where you're like hitting each other with sticks in a park and kicking each other and dragging each other to the ground and You know, that's a bit real, isn't it? You know, you don't got to go that far, but I mean, don't you want to take a few steps in that direction? And that's why I kind of like jiu-jitsu, you know, because it has that trying to kill each other vibe. So when it gets to a real fight, you're used to that. Oh man, this guy's trying to mess me up. You know, you got to have that emotional experience. Because when you experience that for the first time, man, it can be intimidating, you know? So anyway, if you like what you do, great. But don't get confused about what you're doing. And if you want to learn how to swim, you got to get in the water. And maybe you don't have to go all the way to the deep end and swim with the sharks, but you got to get in the water a bit. Otherwise, you don't know if what you're doing works. And that's what I was trying to share with this guy.